A hearty welcome to New England Authors with Kameel Nasr, where we explore the amazingly rich talent and stories of our region. We're so happy to have you with us. We record here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and broadcast around New England. Today we have the wonderful pleasure of having Thea Iberall here.
Thea
Iberall,
yeah.
Thea
Pretty
Iberall,
good. Yeah.
Okay. Thea, tell me, you're a bit called a Renaissance woman. Can you define that?
Maybe you could define
Yes.
it. I heard you're a Renaissance man.
So I guess it comes from Leonardo da Vinci, right?
Right, being able to do so many things. So I write poetry, I write novels, I'm a scientist, I have a degree.
You have a PhD in computational neuroscience.
That's right.
What is that?
That's studying the brain. As a computer scientist, I was intrigued by the brain because it's the most complex thing on our planet. And one of my professors said if the brain was too simple to understand, that we would be too simple to understand it. So I like to take on challenges. So as a computer scientist, I didn't get into the wetware of the biology, but I got into modeling how the brain works. And I was focusing on how your brain controls your hands in order to develop prosthetic hands and dexterous robot hands.
And you write plays, which we're going to explore a little bit of. You write poetry, and I hope we're going to read some of your poetry. And you write this wonderful novel, a very creative novel, The Swallow and the Nightingale. Please tell us, where did the title come from?
The title? Trying to remember. It took me 20 years to write this.
20 years?
It did.
Wow.
And I was living in Southern California, very close to San Juan Capistrano.
Yes.
And I was actually in love with this song, the Swallow song by Richard Farina. He was a folk singer in the 60s. And I just loved that song, and so I wrote a short story after I met his wife, Mimi Farina. I met her, and I went home and I wrote a short story about using the song as a structure around it, and I put it aside. And then a few years later, I discovered something about the song that just amazed me so much that. It was called the Swallow Song, but it had a connection to a song about nightingales. That was a Ladino song from the 8th century. And I just said, there has to be a story in there.
Ladino, was that the Jewish group in Spain, right? Who were expelled and went to Istanbul. And
they spread out all over.
Yeah, but yes, I met some Ladino Jews who still spoke the ancient language, the Ladino language. Yeah. So your science, but there's a lot of science in this book as well. Now, if I remember right, you traveled to Greece. I
want to tell you about the science. My father was a theoretical physicist.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he taught me always to think of the big picture, of everything.
The Big Bang.
Yeah. I mean, he has a theory of complex systems about how self-organizing complex systems work.
Yeah.
And that's his. It's called Homeo Kinetics. And that's his theory. And it's a unifying theory of all complex systems. You're a complex system. The Earth is a complex system. The galaxy is a complex system, and they all have these same principles. And that's one of the driving forces of underlying this book. There's many things. Because it took me 20 years to write it, every time I came back to it, every year, I layered it. I approached it, another problem of it. So I have all this science in there, my father's theory, and I have all this religion in there. And I have this morality in there. And I just, each time, I just made it deeper and deeper.
So what would you like us to learn? What science would you like us to learn from reading The Swallow and the Nightingale?
That everything is connected.
That everything's connected.
But
it's
and if
simplicity.
We sit here and we trash the earth, that we're trashing ourselves.
Yes, environmental degradation is a real important part of this book.
It is. And when I first was writing it, I sort of made up this bad stuff happening in the environment because what's happening in the beginning of the novel is my main character is an ornithologist.
Right.
And she discovers that she knows, she's brought into San Juan Capistrano because the swallows are dying.
Right.
And she discovers something about them, that they're singing a human song.
Right.
And so I had to have bad things happening in the world. And I made up all this stuff. And then one Thanksgiving, I was at my sister's house, and she's a climate activist and a geologist. And she said, "You don't have to make it up. It's already bad.
Yes.
It's happening in the environment."
Yes.
I asked her what she meant. And she showed me the Keeling curve. She showed me all these things that are happening.
What is the Keeling curve?
It's how the carbon dioxide is going off the charts.
Oh, yeah.
It's like going up like that.
So let's go back a little bit. What led you to writing in the first place? We're going back more than 20 years, I guess.
Oh, yeah, we are. In college, I wanted to write. I wrote really poorly, but and then I discovered after getting 4 degrees that I could actually learn how to write. I didn't have to be born innately with the skill to write. You could learn something. So I started taking classes in Los Angeles, and I learned how to write. But I don't feel that I am very verbal. I don't feel comfortable verbally. I feel very but I want to express myself, and I have deep thoughts.
I'm sorry, but I've actually seen you verbally expressing yourself, and you seem very confident.
Well, it's because I've written it.
Oh, I see. You're off the top. You're not really that good.
I feel very uncomfortable off the top of talking.
So
but
what
I feel
are some
really
of the
comfortable writing. I love writing because I can think about it and I can connect things. And I think I'm really good at connecting things. I can take this big picture and I can simplify it. And that's all of my writing is like that. Some judge read my novel, and he said, you need an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of everything. But he said that I managed to keep it all together, and I make it simple.
Right.
And that's why it took so long to make it really simple.
So it's like physics, complexity from simplicity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the other themes besides science in your writing?
A lot of it has to do with the patriarchy and the problem with the patriarchy.
Right.
That I feel like that we're really skewed toward this competition that the patriarchy creates in our society. And so my poetry book, a lot of my poetry is about the patriarchy and how it's affected us and done bad things. And then basically, I look at the swallow and the nightingale as a metaphorical birth and death of the patriarchy.
Oh, I see. That's very interesting. This kind of gives us a segue into a play you've written. You're a playwright. We Did It For You, Women's Journey Through History. And what's that about?
Yeah, that came to me in 2010. Somebody at the Women's Journey Conference wanted a short 20-minute play about women's rights. And it was outside my field because I like more ancient history. To me, Latin is too modern a language.
Yes, that's right. Your history goes back quite a bit. Yeah.
So, but I started delving into this, and I just loved it. And it was, I love a challenge to take something big, and I took 450 years, and I put it down into a 45-minute musical of how women got their rights in America.
The right to vote specifically?
Well, that plus the right to have education, the right to own property, the right to control their own bodies.
So the women's suffrage movement, I'm having somebody who's talking about the women's suffrage movement as well. The women's suffrage movement took 70 years.
72, to be precise, yes.
Why?
Well, because
of the male patriarchy?
It's cultural constraints. When Elizabeth Cady Stanton first suggested the idea in 1848 that women should vote, she was laughed off the stage. It just was, it's something that culturally people just didn't understand or comprehend. That women shouldn't dirty themselves, in politics. They were just too above it. And I mean, that was the attitude. We have cultural constraints today. When I teach courses about this, I ask the students, I say, what if it was a cultural constraint for politicians to tell the truth?
Yes.
See, we laugh. We laugh because today it's incomprehensible that would be an absolute requirement. Just as in 1848, it was incomprehensible that women should vote.
Yeah.
And that's why it took 72 years. Because, first of all, they couldn't vote themselves into voting.
Yeah, and it almost didn't happen. In 1920, Tennessee was the last state, and it almost didn't happen.
Yeah.
So your play...
And Harry got a little letter from his mother saying,
yes,
remember your mother and do this. Yeah.
So, this
the play
it's playing around in New England, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are in full production in Framingham at the Amazing Things Art Center.
Yeah.
We'll be there for the next year and a half, performing monthly there.
Oh, great.
And we're getting great audiences, great standing ovations, and full houses.
And here in Faneuil Hall.
Well,
in
Women's
Boston.
Equality Day,
Yeah.
the day that's the 98th anniversary of women getting the right to vote, it's August 26th, and we've been invited to perform it at Faneuil Hall. So we're very excited about that.
That's very good. I'm looking forward to
But
seeing it.
I just have to say one thing that I want to talk about in the play. It's not just the 22 historical characters that are in the play and how they gave their lives basically in order for women to have these rights. We talk about the thousands of contributions that women have made to our society that are just overlooked by our culture. It's not in the history books. It took me a long time to delve out and find all this information.
Yeah, well, good for you. So another aspect of your writing is you deal with the Holocaust in your poetry and so on. Do you have personal experience with that?
Well, my great-grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. They lived in Lithuania, and they had a soap factory there, and my grandparents and some of my great aunts and uncles, they did get out. They came 2 by 2. There was 8 kids in the family, but the last 2 and the great-grandparents didn't want to leave the factory, so they stayed, and they were all killed. And
what effect did it have on you?
Well,
and your writing?
It affected my mother.
Of course.
We were not allowed to buy any German products as I was growing up, and I wanted to understand why I should hate somebody that I didn't know, and why, so I started reading a lot. I read a lot of Eric Remarque. I read a lot of books about the Holocaust, about Germany, and so when I had an opportunity in 1998 to go to Prague. To study poetry at Charles University.
Yeah.
I decided I wanted to do that because of the proximity of Prague to Auschwitz. So I wanted to go there. So I did. I went on a trip one weekend. Some of the other students and we went to Terezin first.
Yeah.
And that's small.
It's a very humbling experience to go to those camps, isn't it?
I mean, first of all, Terezin is a town that people still live in.
Yeah.
And like 80,000 people were killed there, right in that town. And I could not understand how people could actually still live there.
Right.
And they did. And then we took the train to Auschwitz, to Krakow, and it's. There's just no way to describe it. What it's like to go there.
Yeah.
And I did start writing poetry about the Holocaust, and I was invited to this. Have a poem in the Blood to Remember about American writing about the Holocaust, and so I really.
So We're talking to Thea Iberall. It's very nice to have you with us today. And what is, tell us, the International Educators Hall of Fame? And why was your whole family inducted into this Hall of Fame?
They called me up one year and they wanted to induct me into the Hall of Fame, and they were interviewing me. It's not a teachers per se Hall of Fame. It's for people that are educators using interesting various techniques. And I started describing my sisters, my older sister. She was one of George Bush's 1,000 Points of Light. She's volunteers all over the place. She's a geologist. She's been acknowledged by NASA, and had an article about the trip that she did to Santorini to educate these. It's a whole story about. It was one of the two of the reasons I went to Greece was because of this crazy thing that she wound up with, doing an experiment with in using high school kids in Santorini. And my second older sister is in early education, childhood education, and she believes that we develop our vocational interest around the age of 7 years old.
Interesting.
So she's always telling scientists and all to work with these kids, with 7-year-olds, just expose them to as many things as possible, because their calling is going to come from that. And she's amazing. And so I was just telling this woman about all my family and how amazing they are. And then she said, well, your whole family should be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Can we go back to your wonderful novel
I'd
here?
love to.
Yeah, so everybody knows about the swallows that come to San Juan Capistrano. What day did they arrive?
Yeah, it's St. Joseph's Day.
St. Joseph's Day, right?
March 18th.
Yeah.
That's all of,
pardon?
That's all made up.
What's all made up?
They don't come that day.
They come around that day or so.
They come around that day, and they are really not coming there anymore.
Really?
And they
because of environmental?
It's because the population growth has changed stuff a lot, and there's just too many people around. So they're working. The mission has a scientist, Charles Brown, from Kansas, I think he is. He comes every year, and he's working with them to try to get the swallows to come back. So he's set up little fake nests and recordings to get the birds to come back.
And your protagonist, her name is Deborah.
Deborah, right.
What is she doing besides studying why birds are dying? What else is she doing?
What else? Well, she has a daughter who's a lesbian has met this young woman, Shelley, who's a Sephardic Jew, and the two young women want to get married in the Orthodox Sephardic temple, and they've asked the rabbi, and the rabbi has said no. So my main character barges into the synagogue to argue with the rabbi that he has to change, and after this large argument, he says, well, if you could prove that same-sex love is moral, then we can talk. And so she says, okay, I will, because she takes on challenges, and she wants to connect with her daughter. There's been some problems that they've had, and so she wants her daughter to be happy, and she wants to connect with her, and so she's got that problem. And then she's estranged from her husband, and he's a scientist. He's a geologist, and he's on this project also at San Juan Capistrano. Yeah. And he's doubting her, and then the dean is up against her also. So she's got all these problems that she's dealing with.
And you introduced Gandhi. How does he fit in?
Gandhi, yes. So she finds out that Gandhi had this 7 social sins, and I was just intrigued by this when I found it. It just, if you talk about the patriarchy with its focus on politics without principles, and commerce without morality, our corporations run on a bottom line of a return on investment. It's all about money.
Yeah.
And that these are things that Gandhi say are social sins, and that a better way to develop a society is with commerce with morality, and politics with principles, and wealth with work. I mean, there's so much wealth now that has nothing to do with work. It's just invested wealth. It's just passive wealth, and it's skewing our whole society. Just because some people have all this money, where do they think the money came from?
Right.
It came from all these other people that don't have the money.
Yeah.
So it's very imbalanced. So I bring in Gandhi as a way to start talking about a balanced society.
Okay, and then we have our Persian poet, Farid al-Attar.
Are you familiar with him?
Farid al-Din al-Attar. No, actually I'm not. But he was quoted by Rumi,
yes,
right?
He was.
Yeah, tell us, how did you come about him?
Well, I was writing the book, and I was developing the short story into a full novel, and I was just researching everything I could about swallows and nightingales.
Yeah.
And I was at the bookstore at USC, where I was on the research faculty there, and I was I swear I just turned around and I saw the Conference of the Birds, and it just grabbed my attention. I said, "Oh, this is something I must read." So I bought it and I read through it, and I realized that, the book is really 4 intertwined stories that cross time, and I thought it'd be great to just take the Conference of the Birds and turn it into it's a fictional account of Attar's life.
Well, it's really very interesting and what you quote from him. But what I'd really like you to do is read one of your poems. Do you think you could do that?
I could.
Yeah.
How much time do we have?
Oh, we have time. Read a few minute poem.
Take this book here.
Yeah. Oh, this is a book. Go ahead and take it. It's a book about Artemis.
It's called The Sanctuary of Artemis.
And it's a book of poems.
Because I'm a scientist, I just couldn't just write poetry. So I write what I call contextual poetry. And it's a way to integrate the knowledge of science and history with the language of poetry.
Right.
So I write a poem, and then I write an essay to go along with it. And they resonate off each other.
Okay.
So I'm able to talk a little about the history. And so I'd like to read it's just an excerpt from the poem about the Garden of the Dead.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
And so the poem starts where I'm in Prague, and I'm sitting there in the Jewish ghetto, and then I go on to Terezin, and then I go on to Auschwitz. So there's a legend that these stones from the synagogue were exiled from the temple in Jerusalem. Someday they will rise, borne aloft on the letters of the divine. These letters etch into bones, yod, wisdom, he, comprehension of all life and the unity of God, vav, answer to all questions posed. When jackboots echoed through the synagogue and words were replicated in the synagogue's blood, were the letters scrambled by the pride of tongues, the teachings profaned and sealed forever? We are torches of days, trains from our countries. We have no simple way to bridge between earth and dreams. I buy cookies in the food stalls and hop onto a bus. Red poppies rain in the road. Fields of blue are brushed like paint on captured sunlight. The bus speeds towards a line of poplars, a demarcation of kinds or not. In the town of Terezin, I get off the bus and I slow walk across the square, its trees purpled and roses tamed. A small white one catches my thought. There are clean buildings, the grocery, the bakery, the SS headquarters. The congregation waited in the barracks done up in bright yellow. The cemetery is orderly, tempered by a quarry stone list of contributing nationalities. The crematorium is closed on Saturdays. In the museum, the guide mentions his grandfather who cursed Jews for eating children. On the wall is a poem by a boy born in 1930. This is what he wrote. Zadra damala pinarushi boni, a little garden fragrant and full of roses. The path is narrow and a little boy walks along it. Chalupachek, a little boy, a sweet boy, like that growing blossom. When the blossom comes to bloom, Chalupachek ushna budi, the little boy will be no more. Auschwitz, Birkenau. In the garden of the dead, the exiles weep for eternity. They've gone beyond the pale. In the garden of the dead, they've known the depth of lunacy and hardened on the rail. The silence, wooden buildings in endless rows. Towards the fence, the red grass grows. A mother distracts her three-year-old by picking yellow asters. Her small violet shoes knead the ground. Come back. And then there's the railroad track with cross ties that cling to the limestone bed like vomited cookies. I walk along it, my feet awkward with each selected stride. It's hard, but it's why I must do it. We are torches of days, trains from our country. We have no simple way to bridge between earth and dream. Let me rewrite history, replace adamantine days with lined faces, slight scored battles of pumpkin cries, legends blued in twilight races. Listen to the silent rocks, shoots of grass, soaked land, white birches. I walk the railroad track, an echo unyielding. In the garden of the dead, the exiles weep for eternity. They've witnessed all the lies. In the garden of the dead, they've seen the depth of lunacy and know the stones won't rise.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, it's a great way to end. This is our New England Authors. We broadcast on stations throughout New England, watch locally. We've been listening to Thea Iberall, and thank you very much.
Thank you.